Okay, I think let's kick off today's session. Firstly, thanks again, everybody, for joining. I'm sure some of you were already here last week, but for some of you, it might be the first time that you're joining. Hopefully, you did manage to see one or two, the tutorial or the whole session on our YouTube. We had a slight technical hiccup last week where we were capped at 100 unknowingly. I thought we were on up to 300. So I've expanded it for the duration of the training so that we've got a cap of 500. So hopefully no one will be knocking on the door and not admitted. So apologies for that. But at least having recorded it, you could hopefully all catch up on today's session, for today's session. So as you know, this is a series of sort of probably 10 to 15, maybe even as many as 20, depending on the topics identified, of training just to get you, the freshwater community, kind of up to speed on using the freshwater biodiversity information system. And I'm just going to share my screen and just point to the sort of the schedule of what we're planning on doing, just to remind you. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. So last week's topic, which was really the kickoff of the session, and it included a sort of a broad overview from myself on FBIS, but then Jeremy talked us through various components of the landing page, the menu bar, citation, etc., filters and layers. And then today we're going to be diving a bit deeper into filtering data. And all that really means is, you may be interested in a specific site or a specific species, or indeed a specific spatial area, maybe a secondary catchment. And by using various filters, you're able to select a subset of the data that you can then view in the dashboards, as well as getting the data as a CSV file. So before we go on, for kickoff for today's tutorial, what I was quite keen to do is just to see if there are any questions related to last week's session. The best is either just to raise your hand or to write your question in the chat. So let's just open it up for 5 minutes or so, just to see if anyone is kind of got any burning questions or issues after having either been in the session last week or having watched the YouTube tutorial. Just stick your hand up or type in the chat, and if there are no questions, then we'll just jump straight into the filtering. I don't see any hands, so presumably everyone's good to go. Okay, so in terms of just housekeeping, just keep yourselves muted until we finish the tutorial. Then we will open it up for questions and answers. And the best is, as I say, either to just type your question while you're watching the tutorial in the chat, and then Jeremy and I will work through the questions systematically, or at the end, if you prefer to just ask your question, feel free to do that in the Q&A session. Okay, so I think then what I'm going to do is just switch over to the tutorial. As I say, it's on filtering the data, and hopefully that'll allow you all to get a good idea of this functionality on FBIS.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the second tutorial in this FBIS training series. In the first tutorial, we did an overview of the different components of the FBIS platform. We had a look at the landing page, and we went through all of the different options on the menu bar here at the top of the map interface. And in this session, we're going to be focusing on filtering biodiversity data in the platform. And that is done by using the sort of magnifying glass icon there. So hitting that opens the filtering options for filtering subsets of the biodiversity data. And this is where a lot of the power of the platform is found. So you can see there's a range of different ways that the data can be filtered. And I'm going to, in this session, walk you through those different options. So at the top, you can see the first option is Biodiversity Module. And what this means is you can filter or query a subset of the data based on the biodiversity module that you're interested in. For example, if you're interested in fish data only, you would just click the fish icon, which then you can see it becomes selected, it turns dark gray, and just hit the apply button. And that immediately filters the data on the platform by freshwater fish only. And it gives you straight up over here a little breakdown of the number of records, about 45,000, the number of sites, about 10,000, and the number of taxa, 129, for freshwater fish data available on FBIS. And if you then wanted to drill down deeper into the biodiversity data selection, you would hit the Sites Overview button, which would take you to a little breakdown of those data in terms of key data attributes such as origin, endemism, and conservation status, and an option to drill down deeper into a more detailed dashboard. But more on that in another tutorial. So if we close this search result and head back to our filter bar here, we can then look at the next option, which is the Abiotic Module. And the Abiotic Module allows you to filter for different abiotic data sets available on the FBIS platform. And at this point, we have two main different kinds of abiotic data sets. Those are water temperature data and physicochemistry data. The water temperature time series data are typically data sets that have been collected with temperature loggers, have been installed in freshwater ecosystems in South Africa, and have logged temperature data over time. And this is a really useful tool for looking at climate change analyses in freshwater ecosystems. The next option is to filter by data that have physicochemical data. And let me just explain that in a little bit more detail. So very often when biodiversity data are collected, certain physicochemical parameters are measured at the same time. Some of the more common ones would be dissolved oxygen or pH or conductivity. And by activating this button and hitting apply, that tells the platform that you're only interested in biodiversity data records for which there are companion physicochemical information and data for those records. So there are also a lot of records on the platform that don't have any of that physicochemical data associated with them. All right. Next up is the Data Sources tab. And at this point, we have three main kinds of data sources that we distinguish between on the FBIS platform. We have FBIS data, GBIF data, and virtual museum data. The default is that all three of these are activated. So what you're seeing on the map is data from all three of these different sources. And you can find out what the different sources mean by clicking the little information button next to the data source. And in the case of FBIS, you can see that what do FBIS data mean? Though these are data not available via GBIF that have been sourced and collected from reputable databases, peer-reviewed scientific articles, published reports, theses, and other unpublished data sources. And GBIF are data from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility for freshwater taxa that are known to occur in South Africa. And virtual museum data are largely citizen science data sets that have been collected and curated initially by the Animal Demography Unit at the University of Cape Town, and it's a really rich data source of citizen science data in South Africa. All right. Validation status is the next option by which a user can filter the data. And this really just allows you to have a little bit of control over the quality of the data that are returned in your searches. So if one wanted to restrict the search to only the highest quality data, you could check validated. So these are data that have been validated by experts. And similarly, you could also just check unvalidated data only. So these are data that have not yet been validated. And then with regards to SAS data, which is the South African scoring system, a biomonitoring tool that uses macroinvertebrates to estimate the ecological condition of river ecosystems in South Africa. Those records can be filtered by whether or not the practitioner who collected the sample was SAS accredited or not SAS accredited at the time. And each time a selection is made, one can just hit the apply button to return the results for that query and those filter options. All right, next up are the temporal filtering options. And there's quite a lot of power in this tab where the user is able to filter based on a scale of years or months. So using this year slider, you can really hone in on the time period. For example, I may be interested in data between the years of 1925 and 1950, and then I may only be interested in those data for the months of January, February, and March for those years. Hitting apply will return that temporal slice of the data available on FBIS. And then we have a range of different spatial filtering options. Most of these are management and conservation layers that are generally quite useful for biodiversity data searches. And just to walk you through some of these, we have geomorphological zone, where the user can specify everything from the lower foothill zone right up to the transitional zone. We have freshwater ecoregions of the world, which is a global layer that can be used to distinguish data from different freshwater ecoregions. For example, the Cape Fold ecoregion. And that's an example of a layer, because the freshwater ecoregions of the world is also a layer available on FBIS, but in this case, it can also be used to filter data. And remember that not all layers are filters, but all filters are generally available as visualization layers as well. All right. Next up is the ability to filter by provincial attributes. And this includes the different neighboring countries to South Africa, for example, Botswana or Zimbabwe or Mozambique, but it also includes the provinces within South Africa, for example, the Eastern Cape or the Free State. So these are really your political boundaries and neighboring country filter options in this tab over here. Then you can filter by different management area selections. So starting off, you can filter by your data by water management area. And each time hitting this little plus button expands to the different options. So for South Africa, we have these 19 different water management areas that can be used to select a subset of the data. And we have sub-water management areas and drilling down deeper, river management areas as well. You can filter by catchments at different scales, ranging from primary catchment at the broadest scale, right the way down through to quinary catchment area. And if you know your specific quinary catchment code, this is a really nice way to access the biodiversity or abiotic data for that catchment. Then South African ecoregions, the next one. There are 2 levels of the South African ecoregion that are available for filtering on the FBIS. Level 1, which is broader, and then level 2 as well. We have critical biodiversity area layers for filtering at both a national and a provincial layer, very important and commonly used conservation layer. And this is further subdivided into CBAs, the critical biodiversity areas themselves, as well as the national ecological support areas. And also found within this tab are the national protected areas, layers and filtering options as well. At the provincial level, similarly, you can filter for the CBAs, the critical biodiversity layers for each province in South Africa. Then the National Freshwater Ecosystem Priority Area, then FEPA layers, are packaged within this tab. And this is very commonly used management and conservation tool in South Africa, and the different options relating to rivers and fish when it comes to FEPAs are available here. And once again, if you wanted to look at all the options available for the fish sanctuaries from 2011, you can drill down to select fish corridors, fish FEPAs, etc. Okay, next up are the water source areas, split by surface and groundwater source areas. Again, an example of a layer that is also available as a filter. And if you wanted to look at, let's say, the surface water area, water source area of Table Mountain, you would select that and hit apply. And then just to remind you that what happens straight away is the data queried with your filter are returned, and you generally will see a red outline which shows you the boundary of your filter selection on the FBIS map as well. Right. Again, I'm going to reset my filtering using this little reset arrow here at the top of the search bar and zoom out again. So getting towards the bottom of the list of spatial filters, we have the National Biodiversity Assessment layers, which includes the different PES layers, present ecological state and river condition. We have hydrological regions, which can also be filtered in general or by flow type for a more detailed hydrological region filtering. And then finally, the last spatial layer is thermal framework, which again can be drilled in by the different categories of thermal framework, system resilience, and model accuracy. All right. More on this, more on the thermal data details in an upcoming session. So moving to the bottom now of the search bar, you can see there are a few other non-spatial filtering options, but these are really useful options that we find and among the most used. So importantly, you can filter the data sets on FBIS by ecological category. So this is the condition of the river at a site, ranging from natural to critically or seriously modified. In terms of SAS data available on FBIS, biomonitoring data collected for South Africa to estimate the health of river ecosystems. So you could select only sites that are and have a SAS result of critically modified by activating that button and hitting apply. Then onto origin and endemism. This really gives the user the options to filter by non-native or native species. And within native, you can filter the native species, either for all native species, or you can use the different endemism categories to filter your data by. And hovering over these endemism categories gives a brief definition of what they mean. In the finest scale, these micro-endemic level 2 would be taxa that are unique to a single river or a wetland, right the way through to widespread, which occurs throughout Southern Africa and beyond. All right. Next up, we have global conservation status. So this gives the user an option to filter by IUCN conservation status categories, right the way from the most endangered, critically endangered, through to near threatened, and all the other different categories. And then moving on to reference filtering and searching. So you can search for data using reference category as a distinction. So if you hit database and apply, that will return only data that have been cataloged as database. Or you could select peer-reviewed scientific articles, in which case you'd get only data on the FBIS that have been uploaded from scientific articles. Similarly, you may be interested in data from published reports or theses, or unpublished data as well. And then you can also search for data based on a specific study reference. For example, if I type in my name, you can see that some of the references associated with my name appear, and selecting one of those and hitting apply will filter for those data associated with that study reference. Right, you can also filter by owner. So again, if I type in my name, I could filter for all the data that are cataloged under the ownership of my name. And finally, we have a decision support tool flagger. And this is a tab that's used to filter data that have been previously used in a decision support tool. For example, the Department of Fisheries, Forestry and the Environment screening tool, whereby freshwater fish data from the FBIS platform were used to inform sensitivity layers for this decision support tool. And this tab enables one to apply a search for all the data that were, in that case, verified by fish experts in South Africa and were used in that particular decision support tool. And more decision support tools will be added to this tab as FBIS data get used to in those tools in the future. So that's it for now. And that's the end of session 2, and look forward to seeing you again in session 3, which is going to be focusing on the layers and some of the functionality and nuances available in the layer tab. Thanks very much, and see you next time.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. I'm going to stop my share. And yeah, let's hopefully that gave you a good overview of the filtering capacity. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. So we'll do it like we did last time, Jem. If you just keep an eye on the chat. If you want to ask your question in person, feel free to just put your hand up. And yeah, let's keep this informal and hopefully as good a learning opportunity as we can make it. Perfect.
Cool. Thanks, Helen. So we got a couple of questions coming through in the chat. So maybe let's start there and then we can just keep an eye on hands as well. So the first question, which was from Rafil Wechilop, asks whether the reset function at the top of the filter bar disables the most recent filter selected or all of the selections done up to that point.
So it will reset everything. So basically it gives you a blank slate to then go forward. Yeah.
Great. Right. Then Jean Gous asks whether there's scope in the FBIS project to update spatial layers with future updates. For example, the National Wetlands Map, the new one, which is expected to be coming out later this year. And I think this links a little bit to one of the topics that we chatted about last week, Helen, but yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So thanks, Sean. So phase 2 of FBIS is definitely adding some more layers, which includes actually the National Wetland Map 6, which we're currently working on with Sandy, Nancy et al. So there'll probably in the next 6 months be quite a lot of new spatial layers that will be added, and the wetlands map is certainly the first one that'll go up. We'll also be, for example, updating the water management areas, because obviously the ones we're showing at the moment are the 19, and in fact they're down to 9 now, because most of them, like the Berg and the Breed, have been combined, etc. Berg and the Olifant, sorry. So those will be updated. We're also going to be putting in like the Köppen climate zones and several other ones that have been identified as part of the wetlands working group that will be useful now that we're not only serving river data, but also inland wetland data. So please, if you do have any specific layers that you often use that you would value, like last week, Jackie J asked about the Ramsar wetlands, the Ramsar sites. So use this opportunity of the training to just type in the chat if there are any specific layers that you would like to see, jot them down, and then we have a record of those, because we're keeping a record of all of the chats and the points raised by you, the freshwater community, during the training session. So this also gives us insight into what your needs are, which is what we're here to serve, as we say, and to make something that's more useful for everybody. So sorry, that was a bit long-winded, but I thought it was worth just sort of unpacking that a little bit for everybody in the room. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen. No, that's useful. Leo Quayle's got 2 questions. The first one being, can we symbolize data by the same filter layers? Now, I'm not sure I quite understand that. Maybe you do, Helen, but otherwise, Leo, could you please just elaborate a little bit on your question in the chat?
Or just verbally, if you want, Leo.
Yeah, or verbally.
Nice to have you here.
Thanks, Helen. Just in terms of the spatial representation of the data on the platform, so being able to say, for example, the PES data or the SAS data, being able to symbolize the output on the actual platform by category, so that one can get a take on where different attributes are clustered or whatever, which can help you then refine your search. Thanks.
Okay, I'm still not 100% sure, but let me just open up my the FBIS quickly. Do you mean like the color coding of the sites, or actually getting the data out? Or perhaps we should just unpack the legend.
Yeah, so the color coding or symbology of the points of the sites. So being able to say, well, please, color code by PES category. That gives you an indication of the distribution of the different categories across your study area, and you may then be able to refine your search accordingly.
Okay, I've got you. So at the moment, we don't have that symbology like you would do in QGIS and what have you. I think it was just a bit complex to be able to integrate that into the FBIS. So what you can do is just be able to filter by your category that you selected. And I'll just show you an example as soon as my FBIS opens up. I don't know why it's so slow today. So if you wanted to just see sites with the SAS ecological category of natural, by clicking on the the relevant SAS category, only those sites would be returned. But what we can't do at the moment is to color code all of the sites based on that ecological category. And I think that's what your question pertains to. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We'll make a note of it and speak to our QGIS gurus, who are also the developers of FBIS, the technical developers, Cartosa, and see if there's a simple way of doing that. I think we had spoken about it at the first initial development of FBIS, and there were some technical issues that made it quite challenging. So I think I'll get back to you on that. Okay, but thank you. And then the second question, Jim.
Yeah, thanks. So it's also interesting because we have been chatting a little bit about that, you know, on a slightly broader scale, like the idea of even distinguishing between the data that come in, for example, from GBIF, from other data that are, you know, uploaded organically through FBIS using symbols or color coding. So it's a nice question. It's something that we are thinking about. And yeah, just to echo, we've made a note of that, and I can see the use case. So we'll just jump on to Leo's second question, which is just about layer updates. And the surface water South Africa layer is an older layer. So there's a newer layer now. And I guess it's really just a question on our philosophy with layers. Do we plan to keep updating layers as they update? And do we plan to also retain the older layers? Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, it came up last week, is the value of keeping an older layer so that you could see how, you know, data classification has changed. But I think generally we would want to serve the most recent layer. But that being said, it does require a warm body to do it. And so there is a bit of a time lag often between that. But we make sure that we work very closely with SANBI so that, you know, that the layers that they're responsible for and that they're often served through BGIS will obviously be available on FBIS as well. It's not automated at this stage. That was a point that was raised last week, is how this could potentially be automated, but we certainly strive to serve the most recent layer. Thanks.
And so, sorry, Helen, can I just jump in on that one as well? So the layer I was referring to is the strategic water source area layer, and I noticed that the layer appeared to be the old blob layer from the 2012 edition. There's a 2021 layer out at the moment. If we have that data, should we send it through, or will SANBI update that on their own, or to what degree can the community contribute to updating that data?
So I think definitely the community will be fantastic if you alert us to new layers that we might have missed. You know, we're still working through the various administrative workflows, you know, going forward, because obviously the community is growing. But if you know of the recent layer and it's just out, then feel free to send it to us, and then we will initiate trying to get that layer up on the system as soon as possible. That'd be great. Jim, I think you would agree with that, huh?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we fully value we see the value in having these updated layers in terms of filtering data and visualizing data. So it's a priority. So yeah, I would really appreciate layer requests or updated layer versions. We'll do our best to get those up.
Yeah, and I think there is sometimes in big organizations a bit of a lag time, you know, so I mean, we wouldn't want to serve something that wasn't going to be, you know, accepted at a national scale. But if it's a quicker way, you know, it's silly to wait for it to be, for example, on SANBI, and then when it's on SANBI, we get it onto FBIS. I mean, we can do the same simultaneously as long as the layers are the same and the quality and history of the layer is equal, you know. Yeah, thanks, Leo.
Yeah, and just to sort of follow on from a point that came up last week, a question which was, you know, are users able to upload their own spatial layers or spatial layers for filtering onto FBIS? And at this stage, that's not an option. So we're kind of curating the spatial layers that are available. So for now, the best way, yeah, is just to send through any requests to us, and yeah, we'll try our best to make sure those are up and available and usable. All right, thanks very much, Leo. All right, so now the next question is about filters, and I think it's about combinations of filters, where Mandy Ace asks, is there a maximum number of filters that can be applied in a single search?
So there is some complexity around the filters, and I experienced it myself this last week when I was trying to run a query which included multiple filters. And at the moment, it does sometimes bomb, especially if there's a lot of data, that's included in those filters. But we have got our technical team working on it to try and allow, obviously, we all know the value of being able to select multiple filters. So I guess the short answer is yes, theoretically there shouldn't be a limit. You should be able to do a number, but that at the moment, if it's a more complex query using multiple filters with lots of associated data, so in other words, data rich queries, the back end technology is a bit of a stumbling block, but it is being looked at as we speak, literally.
Thanks, Helen. And yeah, if you do run into at any stage run into issues with multiple filters, you'll see in one of the next sessions that there's always the option to download the raw data for an area or a time period, and all of those filtering options do actually appear as separate columns in the raw data download. So there's always the fail-safe option to manually filter the data yourself in Excel, but we're hoping to smooth out any kinks in multiple filtering. All right, so we've got a question now from Abraham Smith. All right, and the question is, does this tool integrate into the existing DWS information? Abraham, I wonder if you're able to turn your mic on and just elaborate a little bit on your question.
Hey guys.
Hi.
Hi.
The questions that I asked is the DWS system did have a very well put together historical and present info that was usable for report writing and made it easier to back your how can I put it, your confidence in your work that you put out. Does this system do the same? Does it give us a historical reading of I don't know how many years does it go back at all? So I think that's what I meant with the
Thanks,
question.
Abel. If I can just ask a question, what data are you referring to? Biodiversity data or water quality data, or because DWS was
water quality data and water flow data?
Yeah. Okay, so FBIS is specifically around biodiversity. So it's the biological records for different taxonomic group. That's what it was developed for. Since initially starting the system 5 years ago, there was a use case put forward for serving up water quality data. And yeah, there was some talk around flow data, but we're not serving, that's not the primary focus of FBIS. It's definitely biodiversity data. At the moment, the water quality data or the physicochemical data that's included in FBIS is really where it was collected as companion data to biological occurrence records. So if I went to sample SAS, for example, and I popped in a meter and I measured pH, DO, and what have you, that would then be included. There's no flow data on the system at the moment, and to be honest, I don't think that it's likely to be, because we have a sister project inwards that really does enormous, wonderful dashboards and visualizations in terms of water quality and flow data. So it's not the focus, but that you can access the DWS water quality data via the inwards platform at the moment in FBIS. And then going forward, if there's a use case per catchment, then we might try and expand on the inward system. Hugo and Sharon from Award say that it's only really feasible when you've got a really strong a user group in a catchment in order to roll out a system like Inward. So we're not replacing the old WMS water quality and flow database of Department of Water and Sanitation.
100%. Thank you, Helen.
Okay, welcome.
Great. All right, so we have a few more questions just coming up about the intricacies of using multiple filters at once. So we got one from Jane and one from Mandy. So first up, Jane's saying that she's busy playing around on the site and she's drawn a polygon around a group of sites, but she's then tried to apply different filters to that selection, and basically is finding that she's not able to apply filters to the selection within the polygon that she's drawn. So it's a question, I guess, around filter interactions.
Okay, Jane, I see your hands up. Do you want to just talk to that a little bit more?
Yes, thanks. Morning, Helen. Morning, Jeremy. What I'm doing is I drew a polygon, and then when I apply the filter, then the whole map jumps. It like zooms right out. It goes down because I'm trying to apply a filter up here in the Gauteng area. Sorry, my polygon's in Gauteng, but then it jumps all the way down to the Cape, zooms right out, and then I've got to pull the map back and then sort of zoom back into my polygon. So there's something going on when I've got the polygon that when I apply the filters, then the whole map just says houses.
Okay, so I think the reason
I don't know if that's a bug.
No, I don't think it's a bug. I think it's about the functionality that's possible. So when you draw a polygon, you're doing a polygon. Can you see my screen now? I'm assuming you're drawing a polygon using lasso control, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a replacement for a filter. So if you filter, okay, just using this, like I'm only interested in fish, I would apply the data and it would show all the data in a country that's just fish data, okay? But when you're drawing a polygon, you're doing it instead of this filter, as far as I understand it. So in this case, I want to draw a polygon around, sorry, let me just move this, zoom in a bit more. So say I want to just get these sites here. So I would click draw polygon. Okay, that's my polygon. Those are the sites I'm interested in. And I would click update search. Now, you can't then jump back to the filters and apply the filters because you've already applied a spatial polygon filter. So the way to then, if you're interested in specific things, is to click on the site overview. And then if you're obviously interested in whatever the fish data, you would click to the fish dashboard or the frog dashboard or the SAS dashboard, and it would return data within that selected polygon. Or if you were interested for specific taxa in that polygon, you could select just the taxon within that polygon. So yeah, I think you can't do a lasso control, like selecting a subset of sites and then jump back to the filters. Those two are, I think, as far as I know, act mutually exclusively. But by drawing a polygon, you can get to all, and you should be able to get to all the information that you need.
Okay, so it's filters first, polygon second.
Yes, so I mean, these polygons are really useful. I often use it, for example, like the upper catchment of a site, which doesn't form a spatial unit, but I know actually I want all of these sites to be returned. And that's why you can actually manually draw a polygon around it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Helen.
Welcome.
All right. And I think that's quite a useful tip that came out there is, apply your filters first and then hone in on a subset of your filtered data using the polygon tool, which is the most flexible sort of filtering option. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Jane. All right. So we have another question from Mandy Ace, who asks, which is further to her earlier question, if you're working with multiple filters, and you want to change one of them, for example, the time period, would it be possible at that point to be able to reset the filters?
Thanks, Mandy. Great to have you here, a long time. So I guess, so say you applied a filter for invert data, and one thing I also want to point out is when you've got a filter active, this draw changes from gray to like a beige. Okay, so these are called draws. And when you open up the draw, you see the various things you can choose. And once you've selected it, it becomes beige, I mean a darker color. And then say we only want FBIS data. So we're applying that filter. And then we want just the latest data. So let's just select everything after 2000 and you apply it. So you'll see every time you apply a filter, your number of records at the top decrease a little bit. Now, say you wanted to then say, actually, I want data from 2010 only. If you clicked reset here, you would lose all your other filters, okay? So the best would be to just renegotiate or update the filter that you wanted to change to, for example, 2010, and then apply that, and you should get a smaller. So we had 170,000 records, now we've got 81,000. And then say we wanted to look at natural SAS data in the natural category, where you see we've got 12,000 records from 343 sites. That, if we remind ourselves what filters we applied, we've obviously got bugs only. We're only looking at FBIS data. And we've got our temporal filter, which is the last 12 years of data. And we've got the category SAS. And then you can obviously jump in and view the dashboards, etc. So yeah, if you want to just change one of the filters, it would be better to do it manually. So I now wanted to just do that. Seriously modified. You just adjust it as needed rather than doing a complete reset. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Helen. I think that's great. And I think, you know, it is one of the most important and hopefully one of the most helpful parts of the platform is being able to use these different filters and use them in concert as well. And yeah, I mean, I think it would be great to get feedback on the experiences that people have when using these filters, because we obviously haven't tested everything. So it would be great to hear back from you. And Helen, I wonder if, I see I forgot to mention it in the video, but it might be nice to just point out the help function on FBIS, like just an easy way of getting in touch with us if you do pick up on things.
Definitely, thanks, Jim. Yeah, I would like to definitely reiterate that, you know, we've worked around with a lot of these multiple filters, but I'm sure they're going to, you know, they're going to be things that break it or that, you know, it moans. So on the right-hand side here is a pop-up feedback button, and it can be a bug or it can be a feature request. Like, for example, Leo, your feature suggestion to have color-coded sites based on certain fields in the filters, such as, you know, SAS categories, for example, you know, would be a feature request. Whereas if you were doing multiple filter selections and it bombed out, you could create a bug and then just summarize, you know, give it a name and then give it a description. And that actually goes to our GitHub repository, where both the FBIS team at FRC and the developers at Cartosa get to see that. And that's a good way for us to sort of think, okay, well, let's try and fix that, or let's put that on our to-do list as an enhancement. Okay. There also, actually, what I did want to say was we do have a testing site, and maybe Jem, we can just pop it in the chat. So obviously we're sitting here, this freshwaterbiodiversity.org is our live site. So we don't want people adding data to the live site because it will be fictitious data, and then, you know, it's not really what we want. So in order for us to test all the new functionality that's rolled out, as well as to allow users to be able to upload SAS data and see how it works, and, you know, upload a fish occurrence record. It's not so important when you're playing with filters, but it's very important when you want to practice to uploading data. This is the URL for accessing it. And Jem, hopefully you can just pop it in the chat for me. But it's very useful. And when we go into the tutorials about adding data, we'll probably ask you all not to do it in the room, because we might break the system if we're all doing it simultaneously, although that would be quite a good test too. But, you know, to go home after the session and just go and add some fish data, even in fictitious data, to the testing site. Because what happens with the testing site, every Sunday, the live site gets mirrored onto the testing site. And so we have a continual kind of scratch box, as Tim likes to call it, where you can go and try and break the system and add your data and delete your data and all the rest. So please make use of that, especially when you want to test adding or practice adding the data. But for the filtering, this should be fine as well. And then record any issues from the feedback. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen. And I'm not seeing any hands popping up. So if you would like to ask a question, if you've got a note of something or anything springs to mind, don't hesitate to pop up a hand or just add your question to the chat as we sort of wind down the session. We got a message from Carol Monroe suggesting that it might be useful to include a link to the testing site on the main site, so that people that aren't in the training can find out, perhaps under the help tab.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thanks, Carol. We'll try and action that. I'll make sure that everyone is aware of it, because it is actually really, really useful.
And I think as we go into the workflows for adding sites and adding tax and adding data, I think that's where it's really going to be really useful to use that testing site to play around. So yeah, in the next few weeks, that's definitely going to come into play.
For sure.
Right, Helen, I think that's probably a good place to leave it for today. Lots of filtering options for people to play around with over the next week.
I had 2 points that I just made a note of while we were going through the tutorial before we sort of check out, which I thought, so the first was about the filter neighboring, the sort of the spatial filter, which included neighboring countries. So if I just make this a bit bigger, so where you see this spatial filter, South African provinces and SADC boundaries. So essentially the reason we included this was we have a lot of transboundary rivers that, you know, go into Namibia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, etc. And we all know that rivers don't stop at political boundaries. And so when we have these countries here, it doesn't necessarily include all the data that's in Botswana, but it does include any data that's been added to FBIS that's on a river that ultimately flows into South Africa. And obviously, you know, Eswatini and Lesotho are like critical because they are like integral within the country boundary. So that's the one just explanation or expansion I wanted to give on that. And then the other was around all of the filters, by default, everything is included. So if you don't apply any filters, you will get all of the data. And if I just literally now run a thing with 0 filters applied, we should get over 500,000. So 570,000 records are included in, and you will notice there's several that are in the ocean. Again, this relates to the data source. This is the data that comes in from GBIF, which we can't validate because we can't go back and change GBIF data. We can only serve the data that we get from GBIF. And obviously we've included identifiers to allow the GBIF, including SciAb, who have published a lot of data to GBIF, especially fish and diatom data. You can see now if we exclude the GBIF data, we've got none in the ocean. So that was the one thing I wanted to point out. So if no filters are applied, you get all the data. And in terms of validation status, when you add data to a site, it starts out as being unvalidated. It's tagged as unvalidated until the admin team validate it. But the data is immediately visible on FBIS. So if you add data, you don't have to wait for a day or a week for somebody to validate it. It's immediately available, and all the data you see by default is both validated, unvalidated, as well as SAS accredited and non-SAS accredited. So you get it all. If you then want to only have validated data, you need to manually click that filter. Okay, so that's the two sort of highlights I just wanted to make, because it does actually talk to confidence of the data. Okay. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Helen. We've just had a note from Lisa Alferink in the chat, which she excused herself, she had to leave, but just wanted to say that as a citizen scientist, she's really enjoyed these workshops. And just, yeah,
Excellent.
Thanks for making it available to the general public.
Perfect. Okay, everyone. Thanks again for hopping on. And as always, they'll will be recorded and we'll send them out in a follow-on email. Next week, Jim, we're going to be diving into spatial layers. So again, let me just quickly share my screen. So as Jeremy mentioned, a lot of layers. So these are the filters. Tomorrow, next week's session will be all about layers and visualizing the data. And often layers are also filters, but not necessarily the other way around. So he'll be going into all of these and unpacking all the various bits and bobs that you can do in terms of visualizing the data. Okay, good. Thanks, everybody. If there are no more questions, let's knock off for now, and hopefully you'll feel inspired enough to join us next week.